Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Writers Podcast. And I have with me today writer Donna Conrad. Hello, Donna.
Hello. Good to be here.
How are you doing?
I am doing great. And yourself?
Excellent. I am doing well. I mean, it's middle of November, and up here we haven't had any snow yet, so that's been fantastic.
It's a good winter so far.
It is, but I think things are going to change next week, so we'll have to see how it goes. But we're ready. Snow tires are on, so we're ready to I guess, do you have snow?
Occasionally. Last year we had it 3 times, but here in Oregon, nobody's used to it. So there's a little bit of snow on the ground and the whole city shuts down. Everybody panics. You stay home.
Yeah, for sure. So, Donna, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what kind of books you write?
Okay, let's see. I write for a living now, and I write about women who have been marginalized throughout history.
Okay.
And so I dig deep into history and find folks we haven't heard too much about, because most women, unless they were married to famous men, we don't know about them. And so there's a treasure trove of women to explore.
Okay. And
my first book, House of the Moon Surviving the Sixties, my agent actually said when he read it, it's a memoir of my life in Los Angeles in the 60s with an undercover narcotics agent for a father. And my older sister's boyfriend dealt drugs to all the bands that came through LA.
Okay. Interesting childhood.
It was a nice kind, a little bit of a juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And my agent said, you know what? You are a marginalized woman. Let's put this one out. And it is interesting to consider that women in the 60s were marginalized.
Right.
We had very few rights and we had to fight for them. So I was very much a part of the women's movement. Okay. Which we're still fighting today. We still don't have equal pay, equal rights under the law, that type of thing. But my passion lies back throughout history and the vital role that women played in making the world what it is today. Okay. And they've been marginalized, written out of history, or maligned. And so that's where my real passion lies, in giving voice to these women. Okay.
Very cool. And how did you come to want to write about it? Were you a reader as well before you started, or like what sparked it?
Oh, yes. I'm a voracious reader.
Okay.
But I've always had a love of literature. And so I've been an avid reader, and I was a journalist for about 16 years. Okay. And writing for newspapers and for magazines and for fine art magazines. And I finally thought, I'm doing all of these interviews with people, with artists. And wait a minute, I'm telling their stories. Let's tell other people's stories. Right. And so a woman that I knew had read one of my books and said, why don't you write about this incredible woman, Mary Magdalene, and tell a story that would be realistic about what their lives were like, what she did in the historical setting. Okay. And I went, that's interesting. And then during the research, I started coming up with the book House of the Moon. And so that kind of came through. And I think writing about my own life gave me kind of the writing chops to tackle somebody else's life.
Okay. So you've kind of made like a gradual transition from nonfiction writing to fiction writing. How have you found that process?
I find that they're intertwined because I write historical fiction heavy on the historical. Right. So I'm able to do the research and dig out what facts can be found and are known about the specific characters. And then a lot of background into what the times were like. What did they eat? What did they drink? How did they live? What was the political environment? So it's the same process I used before I interviewed artists. Right. What's their life work? What are their political views? What are their sociological views? Right. That type of thing. And so it gets applied to historical fiction. So I'm not so much making up a story. as trying to place my characters in a historical basis.
Right. I get the impression that you enjoy research?
I do. I have to tear myself away from it.
Right. And that's one of the things that with fiction, you have to be careful not to do info dumps and things like that. Was that part of the learning process for you when you were writing the fiction book, or?
It was up to my incredible editor who said, okay, we don't need to know this. But he has a perspective that I really appreciate, because he says, if you don't write it all, you can't take anything out. So put it all in there, do the best you can. Right. And then he looks very closely for plot devices. Like, okay, you're just doing this so you can get here. Make it smoother. Right. And also info dumps, because to me, there's nothing more boring than reading a good story and all of a sudden getting caught up in, and on this day, this and this and this happened, and then this happened. Right. And how do you fix, lamb with mint if you're kosher in Judea? It's like, okay, I don't know. I just need to know that's what they're eating. Right.
Yeah. So was there, like you mentioned, you put more in than that's going to end up in the final product. Was there a lot of cutting for you, or?
I would say there was redirection. I would kind of go down the historical path a bit too far and leave and lose the thread of the character's arc in the history. And so most of the time I would pull back before I got too far. Okay. So on edits and cutting, I would say they weren't as much. Of course, nobody sees my first draft. Right. Not even my editor.
Yep. Right.
And so in that, I found a lot of places where that was happening.
Okay. So what about your writing habits? Are you, because you're dealing with historical fiction, I assume that you're a plotter. Like no,
pantser,
you are a pantser
all the way down.
Okay, so
I am a pantser.
Interesting, because you're so focused on research and historical references. I thought that you would be heavily outline focused.
No, I always write, even in House of the Moon, which was a memoir. I write the first chapter, I write the last chapter. I know where it starts, I know where it wants to end, and then it's a process of getting all of my characters from where they start to where they end in the story. Right. And like The Last Magdalene is just book one of a 4-book series. Okay. So it ends at a point that I had to get her to where she's not fully developed, not fully aware, but in the next book she becomes so. Okay. But I do have an Excel spreadsheet that has all the dates and the times and how things fit in. And then I go back and I look at that. I want her to be at a certain place at a certain time. And I say, is this possible given history?
Okay. So let's delve a little bit into The Last Magdalene. And do you have an elevator pitch for the first book?
Oh, goodness.
Well, writers always dread that question.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I just finished, because the book is being designed right now. Okay. It's going to come out in April 9th. And so I just got like the back cover matter approved. Okay. Cool. that. But I would say that in a nutshell, The Last Magdalene does for the New Testament what the Red Tent did for the Old Testament. Okay. It's a story about power of one woman's voice that refuses to be silenced.
Okay.
And that voice is, so this is, thank you. I'm going to work on this pitch.
Sounds good so far.
Oh, yeah. And it's a matter of The Last Magdalene. Okay. The woman behind the legend. Right. Is kind of the subtitle. And so it's getting to know her and the people that surrounded her as real people, demythifying. Okay. The people that have been highly mythified over 2,000 years. Okay, so this, like, I'm looking at the outline, and there's a lot of references to other religions and whatnot that I'm not familiar with. Are these all historically accurate things? Like, it's okay. Give me. I don't know what you're looking at.
It says Miriam of Bethany, the Magdalene, entered the exotic world of Kadesha, a priestess of the goddess Asherah. Secluded in the Jerusalem temple and complex, they are trained from birth to honor traditions established from the time of Abraham. So is this is this a Christian?
Yeah, well, at that time, this takes place in first century current era in Judea, and there were no Christians.
Okay.
This is pre-crucifixion, pre the Apostle Paul changing an incredible, loving, inclusive man's works into a religion that could be accepted by the Hellenized population.
Okay.
So there's archaeological evidence that the goddess Ashara was worshipped in Jerusalem. During the first century, we have archaeological evidence of small statues that are Ashara.
Okay.
And what originally attracted me to this was, especially in the Old Testament, you have proscriptions. Thou shalt not worship Ashara. You're going to stop worshiping Ashara. Don't do that. And to me, as a parent, you don't tell somebody not to do something if they're not doing it, because it gives them all kinds of ideas.
Exactly, right.
So it made me want to research into the whole concept of goddess worship, of a god in the Mediterranean basin. The majority of religions had a male and a female aspect to the worship. And as I say, in times of unrest, in times when babes are hard to birth, women would go to a priestess, not a priest. And the priestesses acted as midwives, as healers, of dealing with women's problems and women's health. So I have it set that the Temple of Ashara by the Pool of Siloam was disguised sort of as a benevolence society for women and orphans, widows and orphans. So it wasn't like they were openly worshiping Ashara. It was kind of clandestine, and everybody kind of don't ask, don't tell type thing. And they provided services to the women of the town. And in my book, also to the men who wanted to worship the goddess through the tower. And these highly trained women in the arts of not only love, but music, of conversation, much like the geisha and much like the courtesans of Venice in the 16th century, where there was a place for men to go where they could have intelligent conversation, be pampered, and also have some erotic interaction.
Wow. This is all historically accurate, or?
Well, it's historically accurate for the region.
What about Mary herself?
Well, that the fact that there were fallen women noted in the New Testament, whether the fallen woman was Mary of Bethany or not, there were reported women who followed Jesus who had less than a sterling reputation.
Right. Okay.
So it is, for me, this is where the fiction comes in, based on the region, to say, what could that have meant and what was going on at the time. But in this book, it's where kind of worlds collide, if you want to, but it was the people and events that brought around the final eradication of goddess worship in Judea. And sparked the flames of rebellion and gave birth to a new religion.
Wow.
So all those things were happening at once. So in the book, spoiler alert, there are riots, and the patriarchy, mainly in the form of Rome, and the priests of the temple conspired to try to destroy goddess worship. And we find later, from 60 current era on, that there aren't those remnants, there aren't those references to Ashara anymore.
Very interesting. So what is Ashara the goddess of?
She is a fertility goddess. She's the great mother. The next book takes place in Alexandria in Egypt, and it is said that Ashara is the sister and the daughter of Isis. And so it is the great mother goddess, like Isis is, that was a Canaanite goddess of fertility and fruitfulness. Well, that's the same thing. That cared for women's needs and wants and was the loving, endearing, embracing aspect. The Canaanites, and when the Hebrews came over from Egypt, they conquered Canaan. And so there she was. And I think it was deeply ingrained in the people of the region.
Okay.
So that's why I picked her as opposed to Isis.
Okay. And
because I don't think Isis ever really made it much into the Hebrew culture.
Right. And you said that this goddess had a male counterpart?
Well, yeah, that would be Yahweh or whatever you want, the Judeo-Christian Islamic god.
Interesting.
And there are many books out. One, Did God Have a Wife? And there's a lot, there's evidence that part of the divine feminine was written out of the books, that it was actually a part of the original Hebraic teachings that were modified. And you figure the world at that time, moving into the early BC period, that the patriarchy was rising with the Greeks, with a Hellenized influence of saying, no, wait a minute, we're men, we're going to take over, women don't have rights. That hadn't happened in Hebraic culture. Women had the right to inherit property. They had the right to marry who they wanted to or not be married. They had all of these rights, but the world itself was closing in on Judea. Right.
Okay, well, I have to admit my ignorance on this whole aspect of the religious background that was going on that during that time. I just automatically assumed it was going to be just about the Christianity and whatnot. But you're right, that wasn't in play until afterwards. So very fascinating stuff. And if nothing else, I gave you a chance to show off all your research knowledge.
Oh, yes. That's one thing. My friends and co-writers say, okay, don't get her started on Hebraic history.
Right. Now, if I'm reading what you've set up properly, are you worried about any sort of backlash for the portrayal of the character? Oh, you are. Okay.
Well, it's something that you have to allow for.
All right.
And I am a firm believer in being inclusive, and that somebody doesn't have to be wrong for me to be right.
Right.
We can agree to disagree. Now, I know there's a certain segment of the populace that doesn't agree with that and says, no, you are wrong, and this is blasphemy. Yeah. So I'm hoping in my approach to it that this is what the lives of the people could have been like.
Right.
But I think there will be some backlash, and I think there will be concern that I'm trying to change what the Gospels say. But in the book, I stick pretty much to the Gospels. I just give a more down-to-earth, demythified version of what could have happened. And I'm very respectful to Yeshua Bar Joseph, who comes across as Jesus, and what he taught, which was basically love, inclusion, peace. Let's recognize that we're all people,
right,
formed by the same God, and I don't see any problem in that.
Right.
I agree with that.
Okay, very interesting. I'm curious about the title then, The Last Magdalene. How did you come with that, and what's the implication of that?
Yeah, Miriam of Bethany. I won't go into the history. Never mind. Strike that. The Last Magdalene. So Magdalene, at the time in first century Judea, there was no town called Magdala. It was called Tresea.
Okay.
And the town was later renamed. And Magda in Hebrew means a tower or exalted. So I'm going with a pretty popular notion that Magda was the tower in which Asherah was worshipped.
Okay.
And that the high priestess was the Magdalene, much like it's been reformed that the Merlin in Britain was not the name, it was the title. Right. And so there was a place for the high priestess of Asherah, who was the Magdalene. And so Miriam of Bethany, her mother and grandmother before her, were the Magdalens. And at this time of history, she realizes it in the prologue. She says it. I became the last Magdalene. There was nobody left to follow me because this worship was destroyed.
Right. And as soon as you explained the title, I glommed on what the title meant now. So,
right. She is the last Magdalene.
Yeah. Okay. just pulling back a little bit then, like you said, this is going to be a 4-book series?
It is.
Okay. And is this covering the life, the whole life of Mary, or is it going to expand beyond her?
Well, the first 3 books are going to be her life.
Mm-hmm.
The 4th book is going to be from her daughter Sarah's perspective.
Okay.
And it's going to be looking back. You're going to get another perspective, and you're going to deal with a lot of mother-daughter issues and that type of thing. Having a mother of that stature and father that she had, which I have as Jesus, spoiler alert, is what does that do to someone? And then to be taken away into exile when you're like 4 years old and living in Egypt and then living in southern Gaul and doing this. So she has her own perspective on events and how her life turned out. So that's the 4th book called The Song of Sarah.
Okay. Well, what's the first book covering then? What's the span?
Oh, it goes from Miriam being 5 years old, which is about 6 current era, to the crucifixion.
Oh.
So it ends at the crucifixion.
Oh, okay. So you're writing this from her perspective.
Yes.
Well, how, I don't know, maybe that's spoiler, it's too spoilery, but how much of Jesus is in the book, and how did you handle writing that character? Is the book all from one point of view? Is it just always Mary, or do you jump around at all?
No, it's first person narrative.
Okay.
So she's retelling the events. And as she says in the prologue, she says, I'm going to tell of my life, of my life and of lives of people greater than my own. And she says, you've only been told half-truths about Yeshua Bar Joseph and only lies about me. So she's setting the record straight.
Okay.
But there's a lot of dialogue. I have pretty much followed the Gospels. I kind of based it more on John, but I'm using the canon Gospels also of that. And I include what I feel is the heart of what became the Christian teaching, which is love, acceptance, turn the other cheek, be kind, be inclusive. We're all in this together, basically. Right. So let's be nice, be kind, be understanding. And so I approach Jesus with a very reverential tone, because I think what has come down to us is his teaching. It would be of great benefit to the world, especially now. Let's go back to what he said, not how we interpret it. That I have the only interpretation of what he said. No, let's go back and say, what does he say? Okay. Treat other people as you'd want to be treated. And he didn't say treat specific people, treat other people how you'd want to be treated. And I find that kind of a guiding principle in my life. Right.
Very cool. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic for the readers, because it's obviously, it's from Mary's perspective, but historically Jesus is such a much more important figure. And it's kind of like you're reading a story of, if I could make it like, I don't know, comic book terms, like you're reading like a story where the main character is a side character, but in the background there's like Batman or something like that. And everybody was, well, I want to get to Batman. I want to get to Batman. Like that must be a bit of a challenge for you, not to flip from Mary to Jesus. Or did you find that pretty easy?
Well, I found her interaction with Jesus because easy to portray in that I think they both had the same understanding of dealing with people. Oh, and it said that the Magdalene was the mother of her people, and her main teaching was love, inclusion. And so you have her on one side with a dedication to the goddess, and he on the other side with a dedication to God. And yet during the book, they come to find out they have the same perspective. It all comes down to love and acceptance and inclusion. So I found it easy, but I mean, it's not like they had an easy time. I mean, you've got this guy who was going to be king of Israel, and you've got this woman who is the high priestess of Ashara. And so there are a lot of bumps in the road. And through tragedy, shared tragedy, they come together to explore what it is really like to be kind and loving and giving and caring for the people.
Right. It will be fascinating to see how you handle this, the timelines for Mary when it's, when Jesus is like performing his miracles and things like that, and how she reacts to that. And I don't expect you to tell us. I think that's something that we should discover in the book. But I just wanted to mention that I think that will be very interesting to read.
Well, one of my favorite chapters, and one that I'll do at readings, I believe, is Jesus's first miracle when she's present. And she is very much not, this guy's a charlatan, this isn't going to work. And then her understanding when she witnesses this. So I definitely have his miracles in there.
Right. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. And I have to commend you that it seems like this is quite an undertaking. Like there's a lot of historical research for you to do. Plus there's, the teachings and perceptions of people, various religions on this whole time in history as well. So for you to come out with your own vision is pretty ambitious. And for a first fiction book, I'm kind of blown away that you've tackled something so potentially touchy.
Well, I rarely do things halfway.
So
it's like just jump into the fire. If I'm going to talk about women that have been marginalized and maligned, let's pick somebody that most people know, and let's talk about what her life was, and let's kind of clear her name and show what she was about, and the fact that she happened to be involved with a man that has come to be worshipped, as a god by, I don't know what percentage in the world today. It's like, why not? Let's give her her due as being a part of that, as opposed to a weeping, repentant sinner that is always maudlin and, that type of thing. No. I mean, to me, to walk beside a man of Jesus's stature and his courage, you also have to be someone of standing and of internal courage and of intelligence and worldly to walk beside a man like that and to be equal partners with him. So I think that might be the most controversial part, is that she really is an equal partner with him.
Yeah. Well, like I said, that's pretty ambitious for a first fiction novel.
Thank you. It is. It is.
Do you have beta readers?
I do.
And how have they reacted to this story?
They're good. I have, so actually I had a group of alpha readers, which are my peers that write historical fiction. Oh, okay. And went through, so they understand historical fiction and the points, and they came back with suggestions, with parts that they were confused with. And then it went out to beta readers who, by and large, have been very supportive of it. And I also sent it out to some Hebraic scholars to make sure I haven't gotten Judaism at that time inaccurate. How the temple ran, what the holidays were, the festivals were, how people would behave when they were at the temple. I'm curious, does your book have footnotes or a glossary or anything? It has a bibliography. And then it has 7 pages of an author's afterwards. Okay. that talks about names, places, King of the Jews, all of these types of things. It deals with sacred prostitution and what was that and how do we relate to that. So the afterword is quite intense and gives my basis for the claims that I make in the book. Yeah, because I think it would almost be mandatory for you, because in a way you're building even though it's a real universe, it's a lot just for my ignorance as an example during this earlier part of the podcast, people are just not familiar with all these other elements that you've are bringing into the story. So I would think some sort of reference material was almost mandatory for something like this. Well, and I'm voracious reader of historical fiction, and I tend to go to the back and read the author's notes to see if they're valid, if their premises are valid first.
Right. Yeah.
and then to go back and say, okay, now I know they have a sound basis. Let's go read the story. And as I say, even in my afterwards, this is a fictional tale. I've done my best to place it in a sound, solid, historical framework, but it is fiction. I mean, I read everything I could, and then I made up what I hope is a rousing good story that'll keep you reading and wondering what's going to happen to this woman, what's going to happen to all of these people that you become connected with in the story, and how is this going to play out? And that, to me, one of my mentors is Jack Whyte, and he worked with me on this book. I'm the Canadian author.
Okay.
And he worked with me on the book, and he said, you are first and foremost a storyteller.
Great.
Tell a rousing good story and make it as historically accurate as you can.
Right. Very good. So how long is this book?
It's 130,000 words.
Oh.
It reads pretty quickly, though, and it comes out to be, without the afterwards, about 400 pages.
Okay.
So it's enough to sink your teeth into if you're a historical fiction writer.
Right.
You know, I see a book that's 200 pages historical fiction, and I usually pass on it.
Right.
So I'm going to invest my time in learning about something in history. I want to
So who
have something of substance.
Sure. So who are some of your favorite historical fiction-based writers? I don't know a lot of them because that's not a genre that I read a lot, but I know like there's Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth and things of that nature. Is that the kind of books that you like?
Well, unfortunately, most of the writers I really like are dead now, but Sharon K. Penman, who did a beautiful series on the Plantagenets.
Okay.
And all the way she took Eleanor of Aquitaine and made her real. What was her life like all the way up through her death? And I think it's, 7 books or so, and then she went into King John after that. Colleen McCullough, The Masters of Rome, which was remarkable, went all the way from Gaius Marius through Octavian, Augustus.
Okay.
Wonderful. I also like to read Elizabeth Chadwick, who has a little lighter, more flowing style than the other two. Can get kind of deep into the minutiae. I do that. Right. And I like, I'm going to be really bad here, Kate Quinn, who did The Rose Code.
Okay.
And that's more modern history.
All right.
So I've been reading a lot about World War II, but I would say my favorites are that. And then, of course, Jack Whyte, who was a master of reforming Arthurian mythology into something that was real. Okay. Which is why, and he worked with me on this book quite a bit to get it to take a legendary figure and make them real. What was it probably like? Where did Arthur come from? What was going on in England at the time?
Well, that's a good get to get a mentor of that stature to help you out.
Oh, he was wonderful.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus, he had great 60-year-old scotch.
All right, my kind of guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, do you read anything else besides that? Like, do you like anything else that's a little lighter, more modern, contemporary?
I do read more modern, contemporary. Let's see. I am reading a lot World War II historical fiction, and I like sci-fi.
Oh, okay.
I don't like grand space opera type stuff, and epic sci-fi. I like I just reread all of Asimov.
Oh, okay.
His Foundation trilogy. Sure. And I like Anne McCafferty.
Yeah.
I think she's dead too.
Yes, she is.
I've got to update with new authors.
Yeah. Okay. It's very good. So I guess we'll start to wind us down and just talk about the more of the practical matters of things. Your book is being, is it with a publishing house or are you self-publishing?
It is.
Okay.
No, it's with a small press called Creek Press.
Okay.
And they're doing that, but as with any publishing endeavor, a lot falls back on the author.
Yep.
You need to. So I have a great PR team with Abundantly Social, and they do a lot for me. Mm-hmm. I have a wonderful audio narrator that's doing the audio book to go with this.
Very good.
But then it comes back to me. I'm the one that finally says, yes, this is good.
Right.
So it's fascinating for any authors that are doing audiobooks mm-hmm. or want to do audiobooks. It is incredible to sit back and listen to somebody's interpretation. I mean, you go through, you give character sketches, you send pictures if you have them. This is what they look like. Right. This is what I want their voice to sound like. And then you have to just kind of surrender and let them go with it. Yep. And when you listen to it, you're listening to every single word they say. And it's phenomenal.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you about audiobooks because that part of the book market has really surged in the last 10 years or so. I know some authors that the major portion of their sales are audiobooks as opposed to their written works. So it's good that you're on that bandwagon.
Right. I listen to audiobooks often. Mm-hmm. And when I'm physically reading a book, it's usually some kind of research.
Okay.
The hard copy books, the nonfiction. But when I'm driving or I'm sitting around or I'm trying to relax at night, I listen to books. I love being told a story.
All right. Okay. So, and your book will be out in April 2024?
Yes, April 9th.
April 9th. And it'll be available in the usual places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, Chapters, and whatnot.
Right. It should be in independent bookstores also. You should be able to go to brick and mortar and pick it up. And if anybody wants to find out more about my writing or my books, it's easy. It's DonnaConrad.com. I got my own name.
Very good.
It's amazing. And if you sign up, then you'll get some lost chapters from House of the Moon.
Okay.
And House of the Moon is a very exciting book. It's the tagline for that is drug, sex, and rock and roll is just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And and that must have been a cathartic experience for you to write that.
It was an incredible therapy session that lasted about a year.
Okay.
And a couple of psychotic breaks in the middle.
Oh, okay. All right. So the first book in your fiction series is The Last Magdalene, book 1 of the Magdalene Chronicles. Is that going to be the main thrust of your titles going forward? Is it just going to be like book 2, book 3, book 4, or are you going to have different?
Oh, no. Book 2 is called The Lost and the Holy.
Okay.
And that's her time in Alexandria.
Okay.
And then the third book is A Woman Unto Herself. And this is interesting if we have time to throw this in.
Sure.
The word in Hebrew that was translated to the Greek meaning virgin, in Hebrew it actually means a woman unto herself or a woman belonging to no man, which was a state of affairs in Judea. Women could belong to no man. They didn't belong to their father. The Greeks took that and said, a woman unto herself, a woman that doesn't belong to a man, that means she had to not have sex. Let's make it a virgin. So we get translation type things. Yeah. So when the Magdalene ends up in southern Gaul and becomes a great teacher on her own, she truly is. That's her journey.
Okay.
She goes from being the last Magdalene to being a woman unto herself and being complete in herself and moving forward with her own life and her own ability to relate to people.
Very cool. So we'll just close it out and I'll just give you an opportunity. Is there anything that hasn't come up during the course of this interview that you wanted to mention?
I think we've covered it all, except for writers. This is about the writer. You just keep writing. You follow your passion. You follow your dream. Write the story that is keeping you from sleeping.
Okay. Very cool.
That wakes you up and says, I need to be told. Do it, no matter what other people say. And write it over and over and over again, because that's the process.
Right. So I want to thank you very much for coming on. It's been a very fascinating and illuminating conversation. And I wish you all the success with your first book. And I look forward to maybe talking to you again when your second book's ready to go.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Right.
And thank you. It has been enlightening and exciting for me, too.
Oh, well.
It's been wonderful to talk with you.
I'm honored. Thank you. All right. Donna, you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you very much for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
And scene.